emerging, one that very little people know about concerning journalists and the impending threats they face almost on a daily basis to bring the news to you. Gang warfare and the evolution of scamming has had a stranglehold on this city for years. You said in 2006 you broke the first lottery scam story here in Montego Bay, and that will be about 12 years now. How has that crime evolved in your eyes? And secondly, from a personal standpoint, covering the lottery scam, and I'm sure you would have written follow-up stories, did you yourself feel at some time afraid based on what you were exposing?
Absolutely. As I said in the initial stages, when it was not that big and there was not a lot of guns around the lottery scam, you could write a story in comfort. In fact, in those early days, it was not a lottery scam. They called it a game. And then they would call these people overseas, con them and get the money, and so on. But after a time, the gangsters start realizing that here is a source of money, a lot of money coming in through scam. So they start to literally run an extortion racket came about it. So these scammers had to pay the gangsters money. Over time, they realized that a lot of the monies they were earning were going to these gangs. So they became part of the gangs. So the scammers became gangsters. The gangsters became scammers. They became one and the same. And as you know, once gangs come in, they start taking side. And the shootings and the murders start at that time when these side decide turf war. This man wants to be the main man in town, and you are making the same amount of money. So there has to be a showdown, and when the smoke clears, then the man standing is the man in charge. And we have a lot of murders like that in Montego Bay, where scammers, brutal killings. Scammers coming from party, somebody driving the back of his vehicle, he stop to investigate, a man come out and execute him. His cronies decide that they are going to take revenge, and it has been ongoing. And that's the way it has been. Each year, you have an increase in murders. I think like for the past 6-7 years in Montego Bay, every year we have had record numbers of murders. And a lot of it is blame on the lottery scamming. But it's not the lottery scamming alone, it's the lottery scam and the gangs have become intertwined.
Frater says the impact of the violence has filtered down to the journalists here.
Well, the crime situation has had a very significant impact on us journalists out here in the West. Because when we go to these crime scenes, they are mostly very horrific crime scenes, and you have to be very careful because the crime does not start and stop, it starts, stop, and then continue. So you have to be very careful when you go out. In fact, as a reporter, if I'm going on a crime scene, the first thing I do is to check if the police is at the location. If the police are not there, I'm not going there. Because you are exposed to the same amount of danger that the person who probably got killed or got injured would have been exposed to if you go there without a security presence.
There have been some close encounters for journalists while on the beat.
There was an incident up in Norwood that a media team went up there, and while we were at the location, we heard explosions coming from everywhere. Then people start to run, and you realize that they were under attack. Even the crime scene investigators were at the location and to take cover. That is a kind of scary experience that nobody wants.
Intimidation and fear are palpable in the profession here. Most, unlike Frater, were unwilling to share their harrowing experiences. In one instance, a TVJ journalist who had been working here had to flee the country more than a year ago after she had been threatened. She had cracked a gun smuggling operation that emanated in Montego Bay and stretched into the US. She declined to speak with us for this story. Some media managers say that journalists here in Montego Bay face very tough challenges, especially when it comes to covering crime and violence. In some cases, when they do publish a story in the national newspaper here, sometimes the bylines do not appear by choice. Media managers say in other instances they are forced to send journalists all the way from Kingston to cover sensitive matters in Montego Bay that might put journalists here at risk. Frater says it's often difficult for his staff, and at times they've had to seek psychological reassurance with the help of professionals. Though inherent danger comes with the territory, it's not as clear-cut as it may seem.
But over time it has evolved. Gangsters have become scammers. Scammers have become gangsters. So there are people who 2 years ago would be a normal guy walking down the street. Now because he has the money, the influence and the power, he becomes a different person. So you have to be very careful how you go out and do these tours. But at the same time, in the back of your mind, if you write these stories after work, you have to go back in these very same communities. You drive past these same guys on the corners. Sometimes they will even tease you. They will tell you, say, I see a story in the paper the other day, man. I feel like you're right, because they know you live in the community and they know that most time you know what is happening. Then you in your defense, you say, but you didn't see my name on the stories. The stories that I write carry my name. Somebody from some place else come and do it. And to be honest, I really don't think they would want to hurt you per se. But you never know how a person will react if they feel that you are becoming an hindrance to the way they operate.
But journalists here are resilient and intuitive.
Most of the people who are reporters here, they are like from Montego Bay. They grew up in these communities. So while there's a fear element, but there's also an understanding of the environment. So if you know that, you know where are the safe places and which places are not so safe. So you'll have to also measure the way you operate.
President of the Press Association of Jamaica, Dion Jackson Miller, believes the problem is not fully ventilated.
A lot of that is below the radar, so to speak. So at the Press Association of Jamaica, we really have not official complaints of that kind. What you would find is that the media houses, especially the larger ones, will take their own measures in terms of trying to ensure that their journalists are protected. So when you're in a larger media house, it will be easier to disguise, for instance, who are the reporters working on a particular situation. As you mentioned, if you need to take somebody's byline off a story, those things are easier to do if you're in a larger environment. If you're working as a freelancer, if you're working in a situation where you're the only journalist, say, in a regional office, then things do become more tricky.
The conversation on protecting journalists should never be an elephant in the room, says Jackson Miller.
It should be exposed. It should be something that we speak about, because I'm a firm believer in the fact that you can't address a problem if you don't confront the problem, if you don't admit that the problem exists.
Miller recalled an incident where she only learnt about a threat on a colleague in the profession years after she had migrated. In a time of organized crime and escalating threats to journalists, she believes that should have never been the case.
I guess any kind of country that sees itself sliding down the route of gang warfare and gang intimidation always does have to bear that in mind. I think it's something that the Trinidadian fraternity and the Jamaican community have to stay very close together on in terms of sharing concerns, sharing issues, and sharing coping strategies. I don't know enough about Trinidad right now to be able to say where exactly we're headed, but I am aware that violent crime is a problem there as well. And perhaps our communities need to be a little bit closer together, work a little closer together in terms of talking about the way forward and how to deal with this, especially when it concerns protection of journalists. We journeyed to some of these high-risk communities to see what journalists were up against. Driving through the streets of Norwood, considered one of the most dangerous communities, in mid-afternoon the streets are desolate. There are no lookouts, our driver says, like they usually had when gangs ran this neighborhood. Here had been a constant battlefield where bodies fell. But now, with the state of emergency, things are calm. An army camp has become a permanent fixture. Soldiers vigilant to any kind of illicit movement. Residents shy away from the camera. No talk about the community lockdown. But they prefer just to indulge in a famous pastime.
Glendavon has been one of those communities police say at least 2 notorious gangs operate from. Before the state of emergency, most journalists coming to cover crime here dare not enter here unless police officers were present.
Yeah, hear me? Condilero, the new name for road boy. Run borderline, them can't take on no fit tight.
For years, Glendavon has been neglected. The explosion of violence has not even allowed civil servants to enter here to fix the roads. But with the state of emergency over the last year, residents have been given a reprieve. Work on their roads is evident. Even the primary schools that were once shut because of the bloodshed were now reopening. Some schools given a facelift. Several residents told me for the first time life has returned to some semblance of normalcy. With most of the bad boys behind bars, a handful in hiding, and others fleeing the country. To better understand the state of public emergency here in Montego Bay, we were actually given a rare interview with Senior Commander of the State of Public Emergency, Elan Powell, here at Area 1 headquarters in Montego Bay. Powell walked us through the gang culture and their territorial lines.
And those gangs have names. They are in different parts of the city, and most of the gangs are in and around the city of Montego Bay. Almost 90% of the gangs are within this geographic space. So we have like the G City gang, we have the downtown Sparta, we have the uptown Sparta. You know, those are just a few of the gangs that we have. And as I said, it's on the periphery of the town.
Money-hungry thugs jostle for power over some of the most insignificant things.
That has been the case for a long time.
Right.
I mean, a man isn't scamming. He buys gun. He has money. He buys guns, and so he's able to exert significant pressure and influence. So they make him leader, or he take unto himself the title of leader, and help to influence criminal activities. And as you know, a lot of St. James crime was not against outsiders.
That's correct.
It was people who know each other, and as people fighting over, I mean, the most frivolous of things. I mean, people fighting over land, people fighting over just being just those simple things, and that led to murders. And I mean, murders, many murders. And there were many triple and double, triple, and even quadruple murders in St. James, right? So the state of emergency has had a positive impact. You know, the police presence and the continuous operations, I think, have led to a cessation of the effort and the part of criminals. So they are now very wary of us because we are coming at them. You know, so the fight has been relentless, and I think it's going to be relentless for a while.
From January to August, he admitted more than 3,000 persons were taken into custody. Most were released within hours after police were satisfied they weren't involved in criminal activity.
There are others, though, who we were looking for prior to the state of emergency. That list numbered 50, about 53 or so.
How many you have right now in custody?
Of those, we have taken up, I think, 44.
Of the 50?
Of the 53.
53.
Right.
Okay, and they are presently in your custody?
And they are presently in custody. Many of them charged for very serious crimes.
Could you list some of the serious crimes?
Murders, shootings, robberies, rape, serious crimes.
Scamming?
Scamming. Many of them have been charged for scamming too. But the scamming is not that they were wanted and scamming, but when you raid their places, you find paraphernalia, right? Yes. You find lists, you find computer information, you know, that suggests that they are into scamming, and so they are taken into custody, charged for scamming. So quite a number of the people who we believe were creating this mayhem have been behind bars. Some charged, some waiting detention while some are on detention whilst we investigate, continue to investigate.
Some would pass through the gun court and so on, right? Correct.
Right, so they'll pass through the court. Some have gone to court, they are remanded in custody and they're here. And they'll stay here, essentially.
Where are they
until at the court's discretion.
What's the name of the jail that they've been held here?
They have been held at the Freeport Police lockup. At the initial stage, we had some at Barnett Street, but Barnett Street is dysfunctional now, so we have most of them at.
And that's the 44 that we're talking about.
Right, and that's the 44.
Right.
That were from that list.
But 53.
Right, but there are others who were not on that list, because that list contained the most dangerous.
The state of emergency has pierced the heart of crime, as the figures Powell says can attest to.
Last year we had 335 murders, which was the highest we've had in the parish. The 18th of January saw the institution of the state of public emergency. Since the state of emergency, we have had 50 murders. To date. Since from January 18 to today, we have had 50 murders. However, since the start of the year, we have had 60 murders. But that 60 is compared to 193 for the same period last year. So January 1 to today, last year, we had 193 murders. We have 60 this year. That's a reduction of 133, or we could say 69%. So even from that perspective, one could say the state of public emergency has served a very good purpose from the reduction in murders. But we have seen reduction in other crimes. We have seen reduction in shootings. Last year, this time, from January 1 to now, we had 142. We have 42. We have 62 now.
While the police continue this battle, Frater reminds us why sometimes it's so hard for people in the communities to let go of these dons.
In and around Montego Bay, scammers have some of the most lovely homes. They drive the best cars. Their social life is of such places where the normal working people cannot afford to go. The scammers can go. And in some communities, scammers are almost treated like they are elite. They drive them back to school. They fund the back to school programs. They are the sponsors for the Community Corner League. They help out the old lady who need a pair of glasses and the money is taking too long to come from the relative. So they become like a kind of Robin Hood in this community. So even in some communities, there's a strong resistance to the whole crackdown and scamming, because some people believe that scamming is a good thing. Because people who are poor and having a hard time and their sons or daughters get involved in the scamming, all of a sudden they are able to afford things that they never used to afford before.
But that's not the consensus of most people here in MoBay.
Leaving the St. James Parish over the last 6 months since the public state of emergency, commuters are faced with army roadblocks coming in and out of St. James. Residents here say that they feel more secure, more reassured with the army and joint police operations on the ground.
A sentiment also echoed by Powell, who believes the police have been able to bridge the gap significantly with the citizens.
Everybody sees this as part of their own success. So people feel, listen, the police has served us well. So I think we need to get closer to them. And that has been one of the positives coming out of the state of emergency. I think that we have better relationships with not only the power brokers, but the people at the very lowest level. And funny that you asked that, because one of the things that I'm very proud of in the state of emergency, we have had almost zero complaints about abuse from the citizens.
That's quite an achievement.
It has been almost 8 months, as you said, and we have not had any abuse about policemen boxing, kicking, speaking to people in the derogatory way. We have had it has been very good. The relationship has been great. And I think that's an achievement by itself. And so, even from that perspective, people now see the need to trust us, to be part of us, to understand that we are part of the solution rather than part of the problem. And the policemen, so as I said, the transformation is on both sides. Policemen now see the need to be far more interactive, far more respectful of people's rights and dignities.
The concern about the crime Powell and Freighter says has not made any major dent on the tourism arrivals. Most, when they do come, tend to stay in resorts along the Montego Bay coast and hardly ever venture out. And if they do, it's via bus to specific locations. But what happens when the state of emergency is lifted?
I think we're well aware of the fact that this can't continue, has to end at some stage. So we're well aware of that. And as a result of that, we are one of the things that I determined at the beginning of this, and I was very, very keen on ensuring that we not only saw a transformation in the behavior of the citizens, but there was a transformation in the behavior of the police. So that police is far more aware of what's happening around them and what the responses should be. So even from that perspective, we would have police being more aware. So that's an improvement in the first place. And that will serve us well in the future.
It is a concern that I hear on the street every day. People are worried. What is going to happen when the state of emergency is over? One component of the state of emergency was supposed to be a social intervention component where you go into the communities and you find out the people who are not working, the people who are involved in gangs and things like that. And then you try to re-engage them in meaningful exercises.
Journalists here, like the citizens, would prefer for relevant calm, with the hope that the bloodletting they've seen in the last 3 years will finally be abated. Tourists too will hope for the same. So when they visit Montego Bay and leave, it will only be filled with good memories. Reporting from Montego Bay, Mark Besant.